My name's Glyn Pooley, and I'd like to talk about art. This time, my subject is the Pre Raphaelites. They are quite a complex, multi-layered kind of image-making process. So what we got here first is a picture by Raphael, because obviously the Pre Raphaelites were named considering Raphael's work. They wanted to go back to a period before Raphael, before artworks like this. Now, these are Renaissance masters' work. Raphael, fantastic Renaissance master, like Michelangelo, but they kind of painted works in a certain kind of way. They developed a very high aesthetic value that had a certain kind of mannerism, you could call it, towards their creation of their works. This painting, I think it's owned by a National Gallery, came to Cardiff a few years ago, and anyone had an opportunity to see it. It was absolutely beautiful. There's a real elevation that comes from it. Artistry of making a beautiful artwork was taken to amazing heights like this. Now that's fabulous in terms of the ability to elevate, but there's certain limitations in terms of the kind of subject matter that's being used and the way the images are being made. So the Pre-Raphaelites wanted to kind of, in one respect, get a little bit back down to earth by using real models in their work. But you'll see they had so many layers to their work that at times can be quite moralistic, what we could call classic Victorian. So we'll run through some and see what we think. But you can see with this one, there's just a beautiful flow to it. Everything just flows seamlessly around the whole subject. An idealized, manneristic kind of approach. And when we look at the first one by Rossetti, you'll see the kind of difference. So, the Pre-Raphaelites, they pretty much evolved into existence around about 1848. There was three main people involved in it: William Holman Hunt, John Everett Millais, and Gabriel Rossetti. There was a couple of others as well: James Collison, Frederick George Stevens, and William Michael Rossetti. So they formed this, what they call their brotherhood, and they were challenging that high form of art, which would be seen as the absolute pinnacle that would get you into the major collections, if you like, in the major museums, and was taught as something to really aspire to in the art colleges. But these artists, they were very young as well, so they were quite ambitious and trying to engage with new ideas, sometimes for the sake of them, and some were precociously talented, particularly John Everett Millais. But this one from Rossetti shows you the kind of difference. The Girlhood of Mary Virgin, painted in 1848. I said this was kind of subject-wise, it was a common subject in medieval art, where they had like Mary with a book on her lap and teaches her to read. What Rossetti's done here is show Mary embroidering a lily, which is a traditional symbol of purities, under Anne's guidance. And this is Joachim, the father, pruning a vine in the background. You can see a lot of symbolism really comes into play in Raphael, in Pre-Raphaelite work. You can see the cross running through him, plucking the vine. You've got the divine dove of purity, the lily, all that kind of thing. So that's what you get with Pre-Raphaelite's work. They multi-layer with lots of symbols, and their symbols come from their passion from certain writers like Tennyson and Shelley, but also a deep influence from people like Shakespeare. So some of these works, which we'll look at, they're essays in their own right. There's just so much to them. So if there's one or two that you particularly like, well, you can try and follow that up. You'll get some information off the internet, but What I'm finding more and more now is the internet, particularly if you go through Google and that, it's becoming very selective, quite selective in the information. So get a good book on it because you'll get more information out of that rather than the fragmentation that the internet's offering. I can say that because I remember studying these images at school of all places, never my happiest place, but for some reason the art teacher took to the Pre-Raphaelite. I remember reading the books then and I'd accumulated quite a few. The information you had in there is very different to what we're getting receive off the internet these days. Anyway, that being said, we can study the artistry of the work, the way the piece is constructed, and all that kind of thing, how it moves around from one area to the other, how we get the idea of being able to see outside and inside simultaneously, things like that. But yeah, loads of layers of symbolism. The Beloved by Rossetti, again as well, because like an icon image here, classic example, influenced by people like Titian. It's the idea is depicts the bride of the Song of Songs unveiling her lover. The treatment's decorative in its extreme, as you can see. It's decorative completely all over it. And the bride is facing the right viewer, explicitly manifesting, I suppose we could say quite an exotic potential. Bridesmaids around her, as it were, are mirrors of the central figure, and the painting involves a representation that Rossetti constantly went back to, and that's the idea of Venus being reflected in mirrors of their different personalities and in different views. It's also challenging on lots of ways. Rossetti's idea here, mid-Victorian ideas again, the personification of a certain kind of beauty. Live models, they loved the red-headed woman, people like Lizzie Siddal, and there was a real kind of fashion for this long-necked redhead woman in Pre-Raphaelite work. She's white and she's beautiful in some respects. Then the figures around them, they're different nationalities, Mediterranean, more dark-skinned, etc. But they're subordinate in some ways as well. And of course, the treatment of the slave boy is not that in keeping with our views these days, but just gives you an insight into the kind of a culture, really. A little bit of elitism, yeah, of course, but let's take it on its face value as a kind of beautiful image, great structure. We go to the center, wander around the whole piece, moving from different psychological states. With the Pre-Raphaelites, they were fascinated by nature and studying nature from life as well. So you got different studies of the different kinds of flowers. Every bit of these flowers for the Pre-Raphaelite picture, of course, has its own symbolism. Look into that if you're particularly fascinated by a certain kind of image. I'll go into detail with some of them, but there's so many and so many layers to them. As you can see in this one as well, it's an icon kind of image again. It's like a nude Venus, young woman with a halo round her head. This is like supreme virtue. I suppose there was something going on in the Victorian upper classes that maybe were quite held back or repressed in some ways, and society did that. And so this was a way of them releasing that. Don't forget, these are young men as well. Often 1920. This is a bit later. He's in his 30s now, towards the end. And they're using this icon image as a way to share some release in some respects. You can make the readings of the beauty and the golden butterflies going around her head, or on the blood orange, and the arrow going to a heart of purity and passion and all this kind of thing. You can the reading of the roses and the different flowers, and the bluebird, the messenger coming in, all that kind of thing. The face is beautiful, and the look is kind of challenging in a way. You kind of take it for what it is, really. Rossetti saw himself as the kind of poet, a kind of poet that was challenged by life, I suppose, in lots of ways. Very sensitive poet, struggled against the environment and the system, there was always this dichotomy, I suppose, in Pre-Raphaelite work as well, where they find themselves in an age of industrial revolution, and all around them, I suppose, they go out into the city, if they did, there's a lot of poverty. There was a lot of struggle. There's a lot of people not benefiting from all that. Within their bubble, they wanted to portray it. You notice it is coming from a certain kind of bubble. They were seen as kind of revolutionaries because of the art that they were making was not rebelling against the Raphael aspect. But in other respects, from our position now, they can be fairly conservative. We can see it more clearly about the perspective that they were living amongst. But this is Beata Beatrix. This is inspired by work by Dante. Beata Beatrix means blessed Beatrice. And it's a work that Rossetti was intrigued by since he was a child. He'd always kind of revisit this kind of theme of divine elevation again, about, transcending a certain kind of physicality, meditating beyond the here and now. The model is Elizabeth Siddal, and he did lots of drawings of because it was someone that he really obviously deeply loved. But you see that there's all kinds of symbols again appearing of the messenger, the red dove, and things that time's passing, time standing still, and things like that. It is an elevating work, and it's a very common, so it's been reproduced so many times because it seems to incorporate something of beauty and transcendence as well. There's a kind of, but there's a sadness, there's a darkness to it. And this was one of his later works as well. And by this time, he was high on all kinds of drugs, opium and laudanum and things like that. And it had a big impact, of course, on him, and it made his premature death and all this kind of element, which is all in it, I suppose. So that pathos, that element, is kind of got quality that can reach people. So it's a kind of mixture of pathos, sadness, but elevation and transcendence, all put together in the same kind of image, in a poetic way, I suppose you could say. And then this is a picture he did of Jane Morris. Now, Elizabeth Siddal, that was his wife, who unfortunately died young, drugs, etc., lifestyle. And Jane Morris was his lover, of course. They all had to happen, didn't they, then? Well, people like Rossetti did. Holman Hunt, well, that would be another direction altogether, as you'll see. So here, a classical picture of a pre-Raphaelite, what we know as a pre-Raphaelite woman, the daydream, the transcendence, off into another world, going beyond the here and now. He met Jane Morris at the theatre in Drury Lane, and they had a secret affairs. He petted her many times, and he saw her as this elevated, transcendent beauty, strange, elongated form in the way her hands and arms are. I find it fascinating as well because we talked of Pre-Raphaelite mannerism, and we talked about early Pre-Raphaelites trying to move away from that, go back to nature, using real people. But it's a very manneristic way that he's kind of used the arms and the features and the legs and the whole flow of the materials in this. They're enlarged, they're emphasized, they kind of got this swirl about them. But there's a kind of mystical, magical quality to it. And the Pre-Raphaelites were into Arthurian legends and things like that as well, and Camelot and Arthur. It's almost kind of escapism again from the harshness that maybe they did see out in the London streets as part of it, which in the end, that quality, that element split the Pre-Raphaelites, where you had people like Holman Hunt and Millais keeping to the key points of truth to nature, using real people, deep stories, etc. And then another group like William Morris and that went more deeply into the Arthurian legend kind of element. So we'll see. Those all things are overlapping. And then we've got John Everett Millais here. In this, actually, this is a fantastic painting if you ever get to see it. I think I saw it in Liverpool. Well, Millais was a protege. Yeah, he was the youngest ever artist to get into the RA. 11. This is incredible, isn't it? And he made this at 19, so he was coming along. It's tour de force in the way it's kind of painted. Their attention to detail was absolutely phenomenal. And the way they could portray light and psychological elements and things like that was incredibly strong. Here we got kind of story of these between these two lovers, Isabella here, and the families were not happy about them get together because she was like from a servant background, and you have these tension. You can see this brother over here is not happy with what's going on. So there's a psychological drama which goes back and forth between the figures as they play out their kind of tensions between them. It all ends in sorrow as always. He's offering her a blood orange. They're not happy. One of the brothers don't like it, wants to kill her, and all that kind of thing. So the drama's all kind of heightened. But there's all kind of fascinating elements and things about it. Dog under the hiding under the seat, if you like, sleeping dogs lie, all that kind of thing, all the moralistic, the hawk, another predator, symbolic predator. The more you look into it, you keep seeing these references to the fighting and the anxiety and the challenges between these two particular families. But you can see the Raphaelesque quality there, where you've got outside and inside being portrayed, a claustrophobic flattening of the space, which goes against other Renaissance masters' techniques of perspective. So they're bringing all that into it. Tour de force, well worth looking at if you get a chance. And Christ in the House of His Parents, again wonderfully painted. A lot of controversy, mid-Victorian. Are they making a mockery of Christ or not? In this case, he's challenging that. Painted again, a 19-year-old, 20-year-old. Tremendous study of all the figures. Painted on this hard white lead ground that they made. And then they used oil paints over the top of it. Did this very fine drawing and then just built up layers, thin layers of oil paint to let the luminosity of the under white shine through. Quite painstaking, but it does bring a certain kind of crisp clarity to it. Here you got Christ stood, the boy Christ, Dad Joseph, making a door. Christ holding up his hands, cut his hand symbol. Now you can get the symbols indicating that Christ's going to be transfigured, nailed to the cross, etc. All these different figures play the part in the Christ-like story. Sheep looking on through the window, of course, need to be administered to. Jacob's ladder in the background, the dove of peace on top of it as well. The young boy is a symbol of John the Baptist, who's going to go and wash Christ's feet. But when you think of the way that would have been depicted in High Renaissance times, with the Madonna and all those figures floating through the space and sky, here he's put in a workshop, grounded. It's almost illustrative from our perspective today. These use real models to portray the scene as well. There was lots of controversy when this was first put out because it was challenging all those high Renaissance ideas. Wonderful balance with everything and structure to it all, and details down to the wood shavings and the way he's painted all the wood and the wicker and all these figures. Could take a while to make one of them. And then Mariana. This is inspired by a Tennyson play it's not play, sorry, poem that Everett Millais was fascinated by this poor woman who's kind of laboured at her tapestry for hours and hours and hours, kind of gets up and stretches. Intriguing that the leaves from the outside, these fall and autumn leaves from the outside, inside in the interior as well. It's about the struggle of someone who's had lost loves, might find themselves alone, and it's just doing something very tedious. Also, there's a lot of beauty there as well, from the dichotomy of the beauty of the scene, the beauty of the dress, the beauty of the stained glass windows, but the life of this person
that is kind of really, from the poem, kind of quite lonely. She's lost her, in the poem it says she's lost her dowry at sea, her fiancé is deserted, and she's retreated to a lonely corner, threads and does the embroidery. But the Pre Raphaelites give that a twist of a certain kind of beauty as well. Wonderful painting again. That window is actually a window in Oxford, actually, and that's one's kind of invented. These are icons in the background if you see the detail. So, she's lost in her thoughts and a way of coping with the situation she finds herself in a very traditional, in some respects, upper class, pre-Raphaelite, Victorian way. But if you look at it, if you get a chance to see it, the studying of the detail of the leaves and all that aspect is just stunningly painted. It's a beautiful picture, but it's hard to think how that could be really challenging these days. But in quite prudish Victorian times, a woman stretching in that kind of way was seen as quite seductive by the males. And by females, of course, you can see it completely differently. It's a struggle. It's hard, to keep going when all those situation is the way it is. But we get different perspectives these days.
If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe and click the bell notification.